Kodai Senga spent the last 8 seasons in NPB and recently triggered an opt-out clause in his contract that allows him to come over and play in Major League Baseball. I think he's about a top 20 free agent option and potentially a top 10 starting pitching free agent option in this class. But is he any good? I think that's the question a lot of front offices are trying to ask themselves right now. And given that I've actually seen some of his NPB data, I think that provides me a unique perspective to dig into what he throws, what I think will translate to Major League Baseball, and potentially what some of the red flags are. So let's dig in. Let's start with his mix. I have Senga throwing 6 pitches, contrary to the 4 or 5 that I've seen reported elsewhere, and you can kind of group them together. Starts with a 4-seam fastball. He also mixes in a sparsely used sinker. He has a pair of breaking balls, a slow curveball, and a slider. He also mixes in a cutter and has that nasty splitter, and as you can see from the usage here, the primary pitches here are the fastball, cutter, slider, and splitter. The first thing that jumped out to me from Senga's data is his splitter. You've heard this called a forkball, a ghost forkball elsewhere in the media, and I'm just going to call it a splitter. It's an absolutely nasty pitch, and a quick primer for changeup and splitter quality at the major league level to look at is to look at 2 variables with the pitch relative to the pitcher's primary fastball. You want to look at the velocity difference between the 2 pitches and the drop difference between the 2 pitches. And the drop difference is actually one that I've hit on in other videos, and it's the primary predictor of success at the major league level of an off-speed offering. Senga's splitter separates from his primary fastball by about 16 inches in drop, whereas the average is somewhere around 10. So this pitch is exceptional, and as a result, he's generated around a 60% swing and miss rate, which is nearly double that of what you'd see from comparable pitches at the major league level. It's a legitimate plus offering. I think even if there are concerns around it not really mimicking the look of his fastball out of hand, I don't expect a ton of regression coming over to the major league level based on the specs of the pitch. The pitch is absolutely nasty, and I want to see him thrown it maybe 20 to 40% of the time, as opposed to the sub 20 that we see he threw it in NPB. One of the concerns I did have around Senga is in regards to his 4-seam fastball. Now the pitch is going to grade out pretty well on Stuff Plus because he throws at 96. It's got a decent amount of hop. It's got good arm side runs, so the shape actually isn't that bad. But for the most part, he only generated a 17% swing and miss on the pitch in NPB, which if you compare to Major League Baseball, the Major League Baseball average swing and miss for a 4-seam fastball is right around 22%. And that's not accounting for the fact that Major League hitters are much better than NPB hitters. So if Senga comes over to the States, retains the shape on his fastball, even at that velocity, are we expecting like a 12% swing and miss, a 10% swing and miss? It's well below average, and I think it just makes the pitch more of a weak contact inducer as opposed to one that I think can miss bats in the zone, and that's going to really suppress his strikeout ability. An example of succeeding with a 4-seam fastball that doesn't have a lot of swing and miss is to look at present-day Clayton Kershaw, who had a really low 8% swing and miss on his 4-seam fastball last year, but limited the exit velocity against the pitch. Average exit velocity against was in the 95th percentile among all 4-seam fastballs, so you really couldn't barrel it up, and that's the key thing to do with a pitch that doesn't induce swing and misses. But the key thing for Kershaw is that he's a lefty, creates a little bit of deception in his delivery, creates angles I think hitters don't normally see a ton. And that allows him to have that fastball play up in the zone and allows him to work with his command too, which is also exceptional. A guy like Senga, the thing is that it's not really a deceptive delivery. Maybe the best way to say this is that you kind of expect the movement of his fastball based on the delivery and his slot and his arm action, such that hitters aren't really looking at something new or novel or that they don't see a lot. It's a very basic delivery, very basic release, and off his release, you're expecting the fastball to move the way that it actually moves. So that's not good from a confusing hitter or staying off barrel standpoint. I still think it could be a weak contact inducer. I just don't really expect it to be too effective in the zone for the most part. Another concern here is that NPB uses a slightly smaller baseball and also one that's pre-tacked, so it allows pitchers to grip a little better. And in looking at data of pitchers who go to NPB and then come back to Major League Baseball, you'll see that there's a slight fall off in spin rate and as well a little bit of a decrease in the general spin efficiency around 4-seam fastball specifically. Now, is this because the ball's smaller? Maybe, but another thing I think to dig into here is that the quality of data in NPB isn't as good as that in Major League Baseball. So they're TrackMan units which track movement of pitches, maybe aren't calibrated as often, producing consistent results that I think a major league organization would be willing to rely on. And that's going to provide a little bit of error and a little bit of hesitancy, even in the data that I'm looking at, and I showed you earlier in this video. I do hesitate to say that it's perfectly accurate, especially on the movement side and some of the assumptions I'm making off the movement side. But I think generally, even with a little bit of flawed data, it's better than no data. What we can do is we can kind of understand what he's throwing generally, the shapes generally and the results pretty generally as well, and make assumptions off that. I just think more of the nuance, this is exactly what needs to happen to a given pitch to make it a major league caliber pitch, is something that I don't think we can really jump into. And talking to a lot of their coaches around Major League Baseball, a lot of them hesitated to actually make assumptions on what to do with Senga when he came over to the States, because they wanted to get him on Major League Baseball tech, on their team's tech, before actually just drawing from the NPB numbers and saying this is exactly what I think we need to do with the breaking ball. And whether that be maybe making the fastball a little better from a playability perspective, or adding a different breaking ball that they like more, that's kind of something that's up in the air. So an acquiring team of a guy like Senga, I think, is going to have a little bit of a rough plan going in, but also be willing to adapt and move off what they see in the data and the information they get when he's eventually on Kinetrax, which is the biomechanics hardware software here in the United States, as opposed to relying purely on what they're seeing in NPB. What I will say in sum is that I think Senga, among all the starting pitchers in this free agent class, has some of the most upside a year or two into his contract. I think that upside can manifest in the form of about a number 4, maybe a number 3 in a rotation, where he's generating about 2.5 to 3 WAR per season. Maybe the strikeout rate finally gets up to even about 9 per 9, which I'd love to see eventually. But out of the gate, I think if you're expecting him to be an impact arm right off the bat, it might be a little bit unrealistic and aggressive. I think the likely outcome, let's say the 50th percentile outcome, is something like a 4 or 5, a little bit maybe below average major league starting pitcher, where he's not generating a ton of strikeouts, which is something that I know a lot of teams value. But maybe he's limiting weak contact. If they could fix, an organization could fix the fastball playability concern, give him a different breaking ball, or even what you could do is just jack the splitter usage way up to 40-50% and just let him rip that pitch a ton, because it's absolutely nasty. But again, I do think the upside's a little bit limited here, and it depends on what the team is confident in doing with Senga and how quickly they can do it. But if you're expecting him, again, to be impact right off the bat, I'm going to hesitate on that point.